Sheila Qualls is the Executive Director of Take Charge Minnesota, and she joins me now to talk about what's called restorative justice. Sheila, nice to see you. Thanks for joining me for the conversation. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
For those who aren't familiar with restorative justice, maybe define it for us. What is it?
Well, basically, during the Obama administration, the Department of Education got data that said that Black and brown kids were being expelled at higher rates than their white counterparts. So instead of expelling these kids or suspending them from school, they thought that it would be a better idea if we tried to restore them to the classroom as quickly as possible. So they stopped suspensions and expulsions, and they just began this process of if a kid gets in trouble, then they basically are, some schools do talking circles where they sit around and they talk about their feelings and they talk about what happened. But basically what it boils down to is no discipline, but we'll get to that down the line. But they wanted a more positive approach instead of a punitive approach. And that's how they came up with restorative justice.
Okay, and so my understanding is that generally speaking, you have some concerns with regard to this approach. What are your concerns and why do you feel the way you do?
Well, actually, what happens with restorative justice? And I have to say, we are releasing a podcast, and that's via Alpha News. And so that is just, it's gotten a lot of attention. People are paying attention to what's happening in our schools. And without Alpha News, I mean, we would not get the stories that we get. We would not hear the other side of what I'm saying right now. But the problem with restorative justice is what happens is when students see that Black and brown kids are not being suspended, well, what happens is then white parents get angry. Like, well, why was my kid suspended, put out of school or expelled? And this Black kid did the same thing and he wasn't suspended or expelled. So what happens is it sort of just becomes nobody gets suspended. There's no discipline at all in the schools. And that's exactly what's happening. I spoke with a woman this morning, and that's exactly what her complaint was. She actually is in Mankato. Her kids are in public school there. And she was saying, this is exactly what's happening in our schools, but it sort of devolves and it turns into a situation where no one is being disciplined at all. There are no consequences for any actions at all.
So have you been informed of examples in Minnesota in which Caucasian children or students are being expelled in situations similar to other cases where African-American children and students are not being expelled?
Oh, absolutely. For this podcast series called Trapped: Chaos in the Classroom, I have spoken to many people, many white parents who say, their child did something very minor infraction at school and they were expelled or had, some kind of detention or had some kind of consequence. And a Black child did the exact same thing, or sometimes something far worse, and there was no consequence at all. So yes, I spoke with many parents and teachers who have examples of this type of discipline going on. Discipline should have no color. It should have no color. It doesn't matter if you're Black or if you're white. The crime is the crime. And, whatever it is and whoever does it, the consequence should be the same across the board.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if these opportunities for restorative justice applied to even Caucasian students, you would still have a problem or a concern with this particular restorative justice approach.
Well, you know what? I think when there are no consequences, we're seeing right now what's happening in our schools as a result of no consequences. If kids know they're not going to get in trouble for turning in assignments late or not turning them in at all, if there's no consequence, we're motivated by consequences. Just let me put it like that. We're motivated by consequences. If you go to school and you do a good job, you can get a scholarship. If you are at work and you do a good job, you get a raise. And if you get a raise, then you can take a vacation or you can buy a new car or whatever that is. So we are motivated by consequences all the time. And when there are no consequences, either good or bad, there's no motivation. And kids are just getting away with, there are no consequences. Schools have just really, they just sort of turned into the Wild Wild West.
For those who are listening to this interview right now and who can't see it and cannot see you, do you think it's important that they're aware of the fact that you are an African-American woman?
You know what? Do I think that's important or not? I guess to this conversation, it's very important because people are saying, I don't think that the problem with Black and brown kids being expelled has anything to do with race. And I think if they had just peeled back another layer in that with that data in 2000, I believe it was either 2011, if they just peeled back another layer, they would have seen that the reason these kids are being expelled, or the kids who are expelled, are kids who come from perhaps fatherless homes. And when there's no discipline in the home, the first place that these kids come into any contact with a disciplinarian is either a school teacher or a police officer.
So what do you say to people who say, we hear what you're saying about restorative justice, but what about grace and patience and mercy that otherwise could be shown to these students who might be in need of it?
I think that we should show grace, we should show mercy, we should show patience, but we should also have consequences. Whenever you have to put a qualifier in front of a word like justice, justice is just justice. It doesn't need a qualifier. And whenever you put a qualifier in front of it, it's not good, because that means it doesn't apply equally to everybody. So I do believe that there are some kids who have a harder time than others, but you know what? The bottom line is, if we don't give kids consequences, and even people, if you don't show up for work, guess what? You don't have a job. If you don't pay your mortgage, you don't have a house. That's just the way of life. It's the way of the world. And I just think that we're not doing these kids a service when we fail to give them consequences.
I'm speaking with Sheila Qualls. She's the Executive Director of Take Charge Minnesota, talking about her concerns, her position with regard to restorative justice. You bring up this idea of a qualifier before the word justice. There are some who simply say, as you intimated a moment ago, that simply justice is justice. So presumably you have the same concerns with regard to the concept of social justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, anytime you need to put a qualifier in front of a word like justice, it's not a good thing, because that says that if you put a qualifier on that word, that means it applies to certain people and certain situations, and it does not apply to everyone. So yeah, social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, restorative justice, anything like that, it doesn't apply to everyone.
We had a criminal case here in Cass County where for the first time, an adult criminal case in which this concept of restorative justice was used or applied, and it provided an opportunity for a man convicted on charges related to distracted driving that led to the deaths of two people, that this restorative justice approach was used, in which the man convicted of the offenses met with surviving family members of the people who died, and it provided an opportunity for family members to talk with this man, to question him about what happened, and maybe for an opportunity for them to get some closure, and maybe for some opportunity at redemption or healing for this man who perpetrated this offense. What are your thoughts with regard to restorative justice in that particular context?
Distracted driving is a choice, just like so many things that these kids do in schools. They're choices, and we can make different choices. And when you make poor choices, there are consequences for poor choices. And I just don't believe that, I just find it hard to believe that our justice system would think that that would be the way to handle a crime like that. And that is a crime. Distracted driving, it is a crime. When you kill people because you do something that's negligent, then that's a crime. And I do believe that, I don't believe that that's the way that should be handled at all. The family may get an opportunity to say, you know what, this is how we feel about what you've done. But the bottom line is, I just don't think that that's going to carry long-term, it's going to make a change in that person's life.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe not everyone is aware, but your husband, Kendall Qualls, was the former Republican candidate for governor in Minnesota. Before we wrap things up, for those who are interested in your husband and what he's doing, what is he up to these days? I know he's probably involved with you and your group at Take Charge, but is he considering possible further runs for office in the future? Where is he at nowadays?
Well, you know what? We're honestly not thinking about making a run for office again. We are focusing on running Take Charge. And again, I also am a reporter for Alpha News. And yeah, and Alpha News is, that organization, it is crucial. It's sort of like the Fox News of Minnesota. We report, you decide, and we give people information that otherwise would not be shared anyplace else. And in terms of him running for office again, you know what, we're not closing any doors. But we certainly aren't, that's not our main focus right now. Our main focus is Take Charge and trying to make a change in the Black community. And this restorative justice, people don't realize that they're not doing anyone any favors by approaching situations in this way.
All right, to finally, in closing, for those who are interested in the podcast and the rest of your work, where can people find you?
Well, people can go to alphanews.org. And the podcast, they can find a link to the podcast there. They can download it. Actually, we have ranked on Apple Podcast platform, which I think is amazing because people have been sharing this because it's information that people don't know. We did this so that we could give parents a window into what's going on in our public schools, because otherwise they're not getting it. Mainstream media does not cover news like this. And it is news, but mainstream media does not cover it. And so we just decided that we were going to, go out and give parents a look at what's going on so then they can make decisions about what is best for their child.
All right, to Sheila Qualls, Executive Director, Take Charge Minnesota. Thanks so much for the time today. We appreciate it and wish you and your family and your organization all the best in moving forward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Nice to see you again. Always appreciate the visit. God bless you and your mom. Hang in there, and I will look to send you this video clip here sometime before the end of the day. I'll look to send it to you via WeTransfer.
Okay.
So it's a link. You should be able to download the video. It shouldn't be any problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. You take good care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.